buenas tardes. Good afternoon. This is Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. We're online, and we'd like to welcome all of our listeners throughout the North and South American continent, throughout the world at www.coopradio.org. My name is Alfred Weber, and today we have a Vancouver Co-op Radio special program. It's also one of our special fundraising programs for our all-volunteer, listener-sponsored radio. The subject of today's program is New Energy, the Courage to Change, and we're featuring selected presenters from the Conference on New Energy Alternatives, which was held in Portland, Oregon, this past month. And we would like to thank the organizers of the conference, especially Steve Kaplan, for getting us all of the materials today. You can go to their website, and it's a very interesting website indeed, at www.newenergymovement.org, and tune in to everything that's going on there. Today, this was a conference that lasted for 2 days. We'll be presenting selections from various of the speakers: Dr. Brian O'Leary, Tom Vallone, Dr. Stephen Greer, Mark Cummings. And over the coming months, we'll be presenting the full speeches of each of these presenters on the subject of new energy. The questions addressed include: is severe global climate change unstoppable? Are escalating fuel prices inevitable? Is environmental deterioration preventable? Increasing numbers of environmental researchers believe that rapid development of new energy technology is crucial to avoiding societal and planetary catastrophe. Hard scientific evidence demonstrates that we can have clean, inexpensive, decentralized, and safe energy. Our first presenter will be Dr. Stephen Greer. Dr. Stephen Greer, at the conference, New Energy Conference, presented a high-powered, emotional presentation of the suppression of new energy and the forces to reckon with as oil is supplanted by cleaner and cheaper technology. He claimed that before the end of World War II, we had technologies to eliminate the need for all fossil fuels. Since 1955, with the emergence of anti-gravity technologies, we would have had no need for roads by now, but that technology has been sequestered in highly secret, compartmentalized, black budget projects. So for the next 30 minutes, we will be listening to Dr. Stephen Greer. But first, we'd like to remind you that this is our fundraising season here at Co-op Radio. We are grassroots radio. Unlike campus radio stations, Co-op Radio is not linked to any institution. We don't get regular funding from a university. We rely on listeners, on individuals like you, to support us through their memberships. This allows us to keep our voice independent. I mean, we had a guest on from the University of British Columbia, and he was an expert in weather and did not even know what HAARP was. Can you imagine any other organization that has survived for so long relying on grassroots support? Since 1975, people have supported us and kept the station alive because we are the people's station. So Bea Bernhausen is here waiting for your calls, and please call in. This is the only way to keep this type of programming, and you will not hear it anywhere here, or in fact, anywhere in the United States. We are broadcasting both for Canada and for the United States, an exclusive on this conference. So call 604, take out your paper and pencil, 604-684-84 8494. That's 604-684-8494. Make BIA very happy. Take out a membership in Co-op Radio or renew your membership. Now, without further ado, here is Stephen Greer at the New Energy Conference.
Thank you, Joel. Can all of you hear me? All right. Is it too loud? I'm an ER doc, so we're used to good, you got to hear it. I want to acknowledge Joel and Steve Kaplan and Brian, all the people who organized this. It's an enormous amount of work, and thank you for your courage and for doing it. On December 13th, 1993, I was asked to come to Washington to provide a briefing to President Clinton's first CIA director. I was asked to come there because my group had discovered insiders, documents, and all the smoking gun evidence on something the president was very interested in. And when the president and the CIA director made an inquiry through channels about that subject, they were told no such project exists. It doesn't exist. Now, the nice thing about President Clinton, whether you liked him or not, is that he wasn't stupid. And actually, he's a very smart man. And so I had a man who had come to some of my talks back in the early 90s who said, you know, Dr. Greer, I have some people in Washington who are interested in what you discovered, and I think I could help you with this. I said, well, who is that? He says, well, you know, I'm real good friends with the current director of Central Intelligence, the CIA director. I said, oh, that's a start. You never know who's in an audience. And see me afterwards. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So the initial thing was that I sent a whole bunch of briefing materials over to the president and to the CIA director about this. And it had to do with advanced energy and propulsion systems that have been in highly classified projects since the 40s and 50s that have to do with what the public incorrectly call UFOs. They're not unidentified, and they don't fly. They are objects. But in reality, the term UFO was only created after they already knew they were not unidentified, and they knew they didn't fly. So it's a mind fuck. Excuse my French. But the truth is, and I'm going to tell you the truth here. I don't have a lot of time, so it's going to be drinking from a fire hose for 2 hours, so get ready. We were asked to put together this assessment for the president and for his national security team. And I did so, and we put together hundreds of pages of materials. But ultimately, what happened was that they were denied access. Now, you say, wait, it's the president and the CIA director and the Secretary of Defense. They have access. It's an all-access pass, like at a rock concert, right? Wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. They're only given access to what their handlers want them to know, and then only spun and sanitized in a way that gets them to do what they want them to do. The emperor has no clothes. And what happened in this case, I originally got a FedEx from this POC, we call it, point of contact between me and the CIA director. It said, they've made directed inquiries into all the projects that you named, because I have the code names and code numbers of a lot of these operations. And they've been told that these projects don't exist, or they've been told flat out they don't have a need to know. And I went, oh, come on. You know, wait, what is this, the X-Files or something? So I'm sitting here. Here I am, an emergency doctor, rattling around. I tell people I'm just a country doctor from Virginia. And I was, once upon a time, another lifetime ago. But in reality, what happened was that these people were honestly told to bug off. Doesn't matter if you're the President of the United States. Now, initially, I thought this was a prevarication, and they really just wanted to know what I knew to try to penetrate our operation. Well, that's not true. As it turns out, the things that Tom Balone were talking about on steroids have existed since before I was born. And I'm no spring chicken. I was born in 1955. And the fact of the matter is, we have not needed fossil fuels internal combustion engines, centralized power grids, or polluting sources of power on this planet since before that time. This we can prove. The question is, why are we still burning coal for 57% of our electric power? Why are we still burning gasoline in our SUVs? Why are we still fighting wars to secure this unbroken chain of supertankers from the Middle East to the American shoreline? It is by design. It has been done deliberately with malice aforethought. And it's all about geopolitical power, not money. Power. Because when you're talking about a $7 to $8 trillion part of the world economy, you're not talking about money the way you and I talk about it. Gee, I have 4 daughters. Can I put them through college? Particularly when I've kicked my medical career to the curb to pursue this madness. So we think of money that way. But I want you to start thinking of it another way. And that is the ability to be a master of the universe. And the folks who keep this world addicted to the oil economy, it's not even about oil per se. It's about centralized power, centralized distribution of energy that runs the entire industrial world. And who's in the catbird seat running it? If you know nothing else from this talk, remember that. It is about power. Now, the unfortunate thing about that, and I don't know if these guys are just guys who were not breastfed long enough by their mothers or what, but I'm sorry, but I just had the flash on this. But the truth is, there is this addictive quality to power, and a particularly covert power. It is an aphrodisiac. It is a drug. And there are a certain number of people who are desperately addicted to it, and they're dragging down the earth and human civilization with them. It's our responsibility to help them overcome their addiction. It's our responsibility not to be enablers of this situation. Now, the CIA director and I had a 3-hour meeting under the ruse of a dinner party. And during the course of these 3 hours, I went through the evidence, and I went through documents, and I went through all this stuff. And, that lasted approximately 9.3 minutes. The rest of the 2.5 hours or so was spent on who the hell are running these projects, why are we being kept in the dark, and what are the implications of this information coming out. And I say to people, no aspect of life on Earth will be unchanged by the disclosure of this information. It has been kept secret not because it's trivial. It's been kept secret because its release would transform the current situation and the current order to one that would be more different than the time of the caveman. Imagine a time when we will have no pollution, no poverty, where every home and vehicle has its own access for generating energy and power. This is not the Jetsons and futuristic looking down 2300. This is something that is extant, on the planet, operational today. This is very good news. The problem is, it's in a black box, hermetically sealed, guarded fiercely. And as Ben Rich, who had been head of Lockheed Skunk Works, told a group of my people before he died, he said that, we already have the means to travel among the stars. But those technologies are locked away in a super secret project, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. And it's a crying shame. It's true. And here we sit, while our boys are dying in Iraq fighting over the second largest oil field in the world. Let me tell you a story. February of 2003, a very close friend of the Bush family who I work with, the consigliere financially for them, called me up and said, we're going into Iraq. They won't find weapons of mass destruction. I'm quoting, because those have mainly been eliminated. But we have got to free up the second largest oil field in the world, because with China industrializing at 10 or 15% a year with their 1.2 billion people, and India industrializing at 10% a year with their 1.1 billion people, we are on a collision course where we will bring Western civilization to its knees if we don't increase production of that stuff. I thought he'd lost his mind. I thought, well, are we really going to do this for this reason? And we did. Now, I'm saying things that some people would rather me not to say. But I am here to tell you that we're in a desperate situation. We're at what I call V1. How many pilots in here? Any pilots? V1 is when you're going down the runway, and you've got to either take off or shut it down because you're running out of runway. All right? If you don't shut it down, you're going to crash at the end of the runway before you get off, and if you don't take off. So that's V1. Our civilization has been at V1 for about 75 years. Optimally, these technologies would have been out by 1925 to 1930, and they could have been. Seriously. By 1955, we were in a critical and urgent situation on a cosmic timescale. By 2004, we're getting long in the tooth. There is time, but there's not time to do what we've been doing. And there's a very lovely quote I like to use from the Chinese tradition that says, unless we change directions, we're likely to end up where we're going. It's so simple. I love how the Chinese put things. But it's so true. Where are we going? Well, Tom Balone and others, I'm not going to go through all that again about what we're facing in terms of energy supplies and global warming and what have you. And believe me, before we melt both polar ice caps, we're going to have a situation where we're going to have 6 billion people trying to live with lights and refrigeration and cars, fighting over the last barrel of oil, Mad Max style. And it can be better than this. I have 4 daughters, and I have committed the last 14 or 15 years of my life to getting this information out, but also getting the technologies out. So I'm going to divide this into 2 sections, knowledge and technology. And they're 2 separate issues that are related. And I want to go through a little bit of history here for you, just so you know where I'm coming from. My mom's oldest brother, L. Macon Epps, was senior project engineer to design the lunar module that landed on the moon with Neil Armstrong in it. We didn't land on the moon. The film footage has been doctored, but we landed. And so my family's an aerospace family, and I heard and learned of things when I was a little boy, about 8, 9, 10 years old, that you're not supposed to know about. Things that don't exist, but do. And I started looking into this, and by 1990, through a series of things that happened, I decided, it's time for this information to come out. Aside from the fact that there's definitive evidence, if not proof, that our group has put together that we are not alone in the cosmos. ABC News, Peter Jennings is doing a 2-hour documentary that I've been cooperating with that'll air in February for ABC News on this. But the issue is, if this information has been out there, who's had it and why has it been kept secret? Well, what happened is that on the way out of World War II, and actually before it, there were technologies that were discovered of human origin that would easily replace the need for fossil fuels. But they didn't want to rock the boat then. By the time the early 50s came around, people like T. Townsend Brown and the Beefield-Brown effect had come across ways of annihilating mass inertia, mass effect, so-called anti-gravity, electrogravitic, electromagnetic systems. And I'm not going to go into the arcana of that. There are physicists here better than me to do that. I'm just a country doctor from Virginia. And I don't pretend to be a physicist. But what I will say is that we have the ability now to create a civilization free of all sources of pollution and free from roads between cities. Those could have been done in 55. When Eisenhower started the interstate system, the federal interstate highway system, we didn't need it. By the time it was conceived of, we already had the replacement for it. But he didn't have access. Let me tell you what Brigadier General Lubkin told us. And by the way, if you don't take my word for it, we have 450 top secret witnesses, 110 on videotape already, and we've condensed it to where we have about 60, 70 of them in these videotapes on our table out there. And Brigadier General Lubkin worked with Eisenhower in the last couple years of his term and said, I watched the old man taking reports of these things that our fighter jets were chasing all over the skies of America and around the world. But he knew that he had been denied access to the corporate-run military industrial laboratory projects that had discovered the modus operandi, the functioning systems behind these things they call UFOs. And he said he was very upset about it. Eisenhower was shaken to his foundation. This is why when he left office in 1961, a 5-star conservative Republican president said, beware of the military-industrial complex. It will erode our securities and get out of control. It wasn't Abby Hoffman who said that. It was Ike Eisenhower, because he had already been stabbed in the back. He had been this close to seeing these technologies and then been denied access, as was Kennedy, as was Carter, as was Clinton, et cetera, and so on and so forth. The question becomes, who then is sitting on this stuff and why? There is a group, the core of them is about 25 to 50 people. There's a policy board of 200 or 300 people. About 50% of them now, 40 to 50%, favor what I've been recommending, and that's disclosing this information. That's the good news. The bad news is that the other 50% are the more rogue, violent elements, and they don't want it out. It is a battle, and I've been in the middle of it since 1990 in a fairly significant way, accidentally, on my way to the ER. By the way, I tell people now, I really miss being in the ER. And how twisted is that? Well, I'd rather take care of a sucking chest wound, than a sore throat, But it's just more interesting. But I say now that our patient has to be Gaia and her 6 billion children. Someone's got to take care of this earth. I mean, we are absolutely cannibalizing the planet that is our home when we have the solution sitting in a black box. This is a crime against nature. And I'm not talking about the sodomy laws. I'm talking about what we as a people are doing to our home planet when we have the solutions locked away from us. Now, what does it take to bring them out? Or to have an inventor. There may be an inventor in this room that has a breakthrough that my company is looking for. I don't know. I'll just believe it when I see it. Courage, courage, courage. The indispensable element, courage. After I spent 3 hours with the sitting CIA director and gave him all this information, a very close friend of the president came to my home. At that time I was living in North Carolina, up in an area called Asheville, up in the mountains of North Carolina. And this man came to our home and said, the president very much agrees with what you're recommending. But he's afraid he'll end up like Jack Kennedy if he does it. I burst out laughing. I thought, oh, you got to be kidding. This is January of 94. And Brian O'Leary and I were, working with each other at this point. And I went, oh, come on, Kevin. This guy's name was Kevin. And he says, no, he is afraid. And so that was my inauguration into upper echelon leaders in Europe and the UN, the White House, the Congress, where they want to know. Everyone wants to know about this stuff. No one wants to do. So there's a lot of knowledge. We put together, like I said, a 600-page book here with transcripts of almost 70 of these military and intelligence witnesses about these projects. Read it. I'm not going to recount it here. I assume all of you can read the King's English. But the problem is Who's going to do anything about it? So from 1993, we traveled through the executive branch, the United Nations, and the Congress all the way through to 1998. We had chairmen of committees in the Congress that I personally met with. People like Representative Dan Burton, who was chairman of the government, the House Reform and Oversight Committee for the government, who said, I want everything you have on this. I said, yes, sir. Give you everything we got. He gets visited, is told to stand down and shut up, and he does. People have been intimidated. And as Brigadier General Lufkin says, through the installation of abject fear, more than anything, this has been kept out of the public domain. Meanwhile, we're going over Niagara Falls without a canoe or a paddle or anything, not even a barrel. It's time to find our courage, and it's time to find our voice. And this is why the movement that they're wanting to create is so important. People need to know that technologies and sciences and physics that are way beyond anything that you can learn at MIT or Caltech have been around for decades, and they have been withheld from the public, not for national security reasons, but for reasons of greed, power politics, special interests, and what have you. And every generation that has inherited this problem has said, you know what? And I'm paraphrasing an admiral I met with. This is too big a fish for me to fry. I just want to retire and go fishing in Montana. Let someone else deal with it. And I have been with chairmen of committees, senators on the Intelligence Committee, personally briefed, sitting senators on the Intelligence Committee of the U.S. Congress, personally have briefed through numbers of people, all the senior people at the Pentagon. We're talking the head of Intelligence Joint Staff. We're talking the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. I have personally met with these people. Now, they all support the idea of the wonderful benefits that would redound to humanity by the release of this information and these technologies. But none of them want to go into the buzzsaw of the vast special interests who want to keep them secret. Now, the tail's wagging the dog here, because if you ask me where is the center of power in this whole issue, it isn't in Washington on Capitol Hill or in the Pentagon or in the Oval Office. It's in the work for other sector, the Beltway bandits, the corporate sector, the transnational financial interests, and particularly certain religious interests. Ouch. Now, this by no means absolves our leaders of their responsibility. By no means. They are in the position they're in, whether they like it or not, at a time in history where we must manifest the courage to create the world of our dreams and not give in to the fear and intimidation from people who would like to march us into a Holocaust. We can do better than this, but it will take a lot of people helping us do it. By 1998, I had concluded that the people in the Congress and the people in the White House and at the UN, unfortunately, were not courageous enough to take this on. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Boutros Boutros-Ghali, his wife and I met extensively about this. He was absolutely threatened and forced not to hold a massive disclosure event at the UN. Kofi Annan, when he came in, initially said, we'll let you have it here. And then some people visited him and scared him, and he withdrew the offer. True story. I mean, it's, you know, I'll do an autobiography someday. Nobody will believe it. It'll have to be a novel. But the bottom line is that it keeps falling back in our lap, us, the people. I have no official standing. None. And I remember years ago in 1992, the head of Army Intelligence saying, just who the hell do you think you are? I said, well, I don't know. I guess I'm just too dumb not to know who I'm not. I said, I'm a denizen of Earth. And then I looked at him, I did my alpha male thing. I said, look, buddy, My people were some of the original founders of the United States. My father's half Cherokee Indian. You stole this whole country from them. Screw you and the horse you rode in on. Here's what we're going to do. So I said it to him just like that. But the problem really comes down to leadership. It really does. The things are out there. People are going to have to put the technologies and the information with leadership. And I'm afraid that doesn't exist on Capitol Hill. I'm not saying there are no good people up there, but they are not risk takers. They're risk averse. And the buzzword is CYA. Same thing at the Pentagon. Cover your ass. They are not going to go out on a limb on something this incendiary, where they're going to have to bite a lot of the hands that feed them. And we're talking big hands. We're talking Godzilla's hands. So the bottom line is that the people are going to have to demand change and are going to have to evince the courage to bring out the Generation 1 versions of these systems. Don't expect Lockheed to open its treasure chest anytime soon. I wish they would. I think we have to do it, and they'll follow in our wake. And I'm being modest. I'm not saying I think, I know. I've been told this by these insiders. I mean, read between the lines. I've met with everyone who's a significant principal in this issue. And they are simply not going to step out in front of this. And the ones who have met a fearsome fate. Back in the mid-90s, how many people remember there was a CIA director named Bill Colby from the 70s? And his best friend, who was a colonel, a full bird colonel, approached us and said, you know, Colby had been involved in this cell, this compartmentalized operation dealing with this issue back through his career. And he is now elderly and wants this out. And he was still in touch with, and remember, this is not a monolith. The group that runs this is highly fractured, very much divided. But he was involved with a group that was more supportive of what we were calling for. So he asked for a meeting between a member of my board, who I trust very well, and him. And he was going to transfer $50 million in seed funding and some of these operational technologies that had actually been derived from the studying of off-planet extraterrestrial vehicles. And the week he was going to meet with my board member, they found him floating down the Potomac River. And if you haven't seen the movie Manchurian Candidate, go see it. Because how they whacked the senator who found out about what was going on, it was taken right from the story of what happened to Bill Colby. So they left a marker down. And this, of course, blew up like an atomic bomb in the White House and other places going, oh my God. So they have scared people off. But what I tell people is, don't give in to your fear. A lot of people say, and a lot of people say, aren't you afraid? I say, no, I'm afraid of not doing anything. I'm afraid of the world continuing on as it is and leaving our children's children with a ravaged planet, warring over the last bottle of kerosene to hurl at each other as Molotov cocktails. I mean, we have to do better than this. And you're not going to have peace in the world without justice, and you're not going to have justice without abundance that is and you can't have that using fossil fuels. It's a zero-sum game. And we're running out of it. So we as a people have to realize that we're at this moment in time where information, knowledge, and the actual physical technologies have to come out. Generation after generation after generation of people who've been on the inside have said, yes, this should happen, but I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be responsible for that. And it's because they know what's involved to bring this out. This is not a small matter. If it were trivial, it would have been done. Very difficult.
This is Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM, on the internet at www.coopradio.org. You are listening to a special program of the Monday Brown Bagger, I'm Alfred Weber, on New Energy, The Courage to Change, featuring selected presenters from the Conference on New Energy Alternatives held in the end of September 2004 in Portland, Oregon. And you have just been listening to Dr. Stephen Greer, founder of the Disclosure Project. You can read more about his project on the internet at www.disclosureproject.org. But first, we must come back to Co-op Radio, an institution here in Vancouver that we've been on the air now for 30 years. And we're on the air only because of you, because we're listener-sponsored. And this is one of the few times during the year when we hold these special programs. We'll be on the air today from noon until 2:30 p.m. with this special program on new energy alternatives, interrupted by asking you to call in and pledge, either take out a new membership. If you're a new member, we have alternatives for students and for people on fixed incomes. We have regular memberships. We have sustaining memberships, and that is if people who want to contribute just a small amount every month. But this is how we keep our transmitter going. This is how we keep our lights going. All of us here at the station are volunteers. We're a very important alternative voice. Co-op Radio is a media outlet for the economically, socially, and politically disadvantaged. In difficult and certain times of war and BC government cutbacks, Co-op Radio provides an alternative perspective to dominant corporate media institutions. We provide a voice to those that do not have access elsewhere. So, here you're going to find local, relevant, vibrant, and vital radio, which can only be heard with your support. So please call in now to take out a membership or renew your membership. And the number to call is 604-684-8494. Now, we have had a call and we have had a membership that called in from Lumbee, BC, listening on the internet. And last week we had 2 listeners call in to buy memberships, become members of Co-op Radio, that called in from the United States of America listening to Co-op Radio on the internet because they realize in their disadvantaged situation that they're getting information that they would not get there. Well, the same applies here in Vancouver, and we take Co-op Radio for granted because we've been around for 30 years. Well, no. We depend on you, our listenership, our members. One listener called up on our studio line wanting to thank us for putting on the voice of Dr. Stephen Greer, how that was very important information. Well, that's information that you won't hear on the mainstream media in this context. So we ask you to call in at 604-684-8494 and take a chance, take responsibility for your station. This is a station which, under special co-op rules of the CTRC, is run and owned by the membership. And guess who the membership is? The membership is you, the listeners. It's us, the volunteers at the radio station, who are putting on the radio program. All of us here who are volunteers are also members of the radio station. And we come together. It's our votes and our participation that keep this unique asset on the air. We're listened to worldwide. We have important alternative voices on the air, and we would like to ask you, please, to call in at 604-684-8494. If you're listening to this information, we don't ask you very often to call in and pledge, but we're asking you now, 604-684-8494 for Co-op Radio. We're now going to go back to a second speaker, another presentation of the New Energy Conference, and that's Mark Cummings, a physicist, inventor, and theorist, who says we don't have an energy shortage, we have an integrity shortage. What we need is the will and the courage to embrace and adopt plentiful, non-polluting energy sources that currently exist and move forward integrating these existing new systems into our existing infrastructure. We also need to accelerate our effort to bring new, highly efficient innovations into the marketplace. The enormity of the ambient energy that presently exists and is circulating throughout the environment of the planet in the form of solar, wind, tidal, and heat is such that these forms of energy alone could easily supply all of humanity's energy needs if intelligently utilized. Physicist Mark Cummings.
Now you know why you have to know Mark Cummings. We're going to take a break. It's well earned by all of you. I know the seating hasn't been as comfortable as yesterday's, but we're going to reconvene at 3:15. Please be prompt. And
Hello? Okay. It's a real delight to be here and be able to address you. This conference has been dealing with an issue that's been very close to my heart and been a central focus of my passions for more than 2 decades. And that really comes out of a deep love of the earth and a love of humanity and just a clear sense that the way that we're proceeding forward in terms of our relationship to the earth is unsustainable. And I realized that when I was a little kid. I actually thought, in the 70s, that surely by the end of the 70s we'll see the phasing out of internal combustion engines. And I continue to be a little bit perhaps overly optimistic about how well and how quickly the human race can get the message and make the appropriate adjustments to what is becoming increasingly and increasingly obviously an unsustainable infrastructure that is doing damage to all life. The biospheric crisis is something that is really becoming mainstream. It's something that all of us know about. The evidence has become overwhelming. I remember just a few years ago when the scientists were really in a debate about global warming. Well, the debate has pretty much been silenced, and many of the climatologists and atmospheric scientists, meteorologists, oceanographers who were gathering an enormous amount of data have been really shocked by the severity of the damage to the biosphere that we have already wreaked upon our planet, and such that the crisis, really, if you go to any climate change conferences, it's kind of mind-blowing what they're saying and how little of the accurate message of what is known at the leading edge of science actually gets out to the human race. How much the media is basically preventing humanity from having the right, accurate information, which is necessary for us, an appropriate response to the situation. So, given the biospheric crisis, that provides a profound challenge to all of us. I think it actually also can create the common ground whereby we can go forward, because The biospheric crisis brings all of humanity into a common realization that we are all together in this lifeboat, this planet Earth, which is our life support system. The biosphere, the Gaian being that is the planet, is being realized more and more to not just be a whole bunch of organisms, but the biosphere is actually a single life form. There's really only one life form on the planet. It is the biosphere, and we are the biosphere. We often tend to talk about the biosphere as like something else, like we're not part of it. We as organic beings are the biosphere, and human beings right now are the only species that is engaged in a dynamic that is killing the biosphere, that is really undermining the life support system of the planet. And so it is our responsibility, and it is in our hands to turn that around, to actually develop a new sustainable infrastructure. Right now, the infrastructure relative to energy makes it very difficult for people to do the right thing relative to the environment. It costs so much more to actually have clean energy systems. To have an emissionless electric car is outside of most people's budget. I believe that the average person, if given an option between doing something that is polluting and desecrating to the biosphere versus something that is not, if it didn't cost any more, everybody, I believe, the vast majority of people would choose that which is earth-friendly. But we don't have that option. Things have been engineered by corporate forces and forces that are benefiting off of the fossil fuel technologies, and many of just the whole kind of corporate hegemony, which is metastasized all over the planet and is really the greatest challenge and threat to life on Earth right now. It's exactly like cancer tumors. You know, what a cancer tumor does in the body of an organism is it looks out for its own best interest. It just wants to grow and expand without any thought of that it may be killing the organism upon which it ultimately depends. Corporations that look out just for their bottom line are identical to that in the body of the Earth and in the body of humanity. So we have this enormous crisis on our hands, but we also have a fantastic array of solutions that are emerging from the brilliance of the human mind and the human heart engaging a much deeper understanding and exploration of the nature of fundamental physics. At the foundations of physics right now, there is an enormous revolution taking place. Much of it's not being televised because it's so revolutionary. Literally, our understandings of fundamentals, understanding of space, time, light, mass, force, all of those things that most lay people think most physicists agree upon are hotly under debate, and we're coming to understand that our previous concepts of those were very much informed by the materialistic scientific model that left consciousness out of the picture and tended to try to see the world as an objective material object, independent from the mind of the observer. What we're now coming to see is just for example, this really contextualizes much of the discussions that we've had relative to the physics of these devices. We now know that space, just this seeming emptiness that is all-pervading, which is called by the scientific community the quantum vacuum, is anything but a vacuum. Everything we know about space now is that it is seething with energetic potentiality. It has an enormous energy density. There's various debates about what exactly that is, but it's so enormous that it really stretches our imagination to imagine how could that much energy be embedded in the very fabric of this seemingly empty space all around us. We've come to understand that space is not so much just a dead empty void, but is in actuality a structure structured out of pure potential. And this potential has an infinite quality. It's radially, omnidirectionally balancing itself out and canceling itself out in all directions so as to appear as emptiness. But in fact, when you perturb it in certain ways, we find out that it's seething with energy. And in fact, that underlying infinite potential is really that which really contextualizes and embraces all of existence. It's at the foundations of quantum physics and quantum field theory. None of the equations would work out right if it wasn't for this underlying zero-point field which fills all space. This enormous amount of energy, as John Wheeler calculated the energetic potential of space to be 10 to the 94th power grams per cubic centimeter. That's a theoretical calculation, but it comes out of a consideration that points to that space is not a vacuum, but a plenum. And I like the word plenum because the word plenum in the dictionary means an absolute fullness. And to continue to use the word vacuum for space that we now know to be anything but empty, space we now know to be characterized by virtually boundless luminosity. It's efflorescing with light, with what are sometimes called vacuum photons, virtual light. But I believe that this light is actually, the light that is informing all being. It's the lumen naturale that is what people of awakened consciousness actually perceive. I literally believe it's a light that is living all of existence. And it's really striking to see that these breakthroughs happening on the leading edge of physics, describing space as having the properties of boundless luminosity, infinite energetic potential, and I believe sentience. I find that all the great spiritual traditions of the world characterize consciousness or mind in its unconditioned nature as being equivalent to or analogous to space. I think that it actually is space. I think that the space that we are currently arising in is really identical to what is called the Great Spirit, the mind of God. It is this field of boundless potentiality that is currently, right in this moment, manifesting itself as this entire universe. And that we are actually arising out of this field every instant, every nanosecond. There is a new creation emerging out of the field. And a lot of the physics of zero-point energy is finding out that the key to interacting with this field and tapping it is resonance, as has been talked about a number of times before. Years ago, I did a number of experiments with piezoelectric ringing resonance, which was resonating piezoelectric crystals. And I found that at certain states of resonance, these crystals actually put out more power than you were putting in. It was a matter of tuning them just properly. And I find it really profound to see that at certain states of resonance, effects take place that seem to contravene or contradict our understanding of the laws of physics and our understanding of the laws of conservation of energy. And this, I believe, also has profound implications for understanding the nature of ourselves, because we ourselves, right in this moment, are pervaded by that field of boundless luminosity, infinite energetic potential. Literally, our entire biocrystalline manifestation is emerging out of this plenum as an integrated complex of asymmetries arising out of this field of boundless potential. This is the view that's actually being brought forth at the leading edge of physics, and it sounds alluringly similar to the accounts that mystics describe in terms of literally feeling everything in the embrace of the Great Spirit, feeling everything arising out of this field of infinite potential. And really, when we really look at it, every particle, every electron can actually be seen as a geometrico-dynamic modification of this dynamic plenum of infinite potentiality. Everything is literally breathing the Great Spirit, and the Great Spirit is breathing itself into existence as the whole universe. And when you realize that, when you contemplate it, you can recognize that this plenum is not something else. It's actually completely continuous with our being. We are absolutely seamless expressions of it. And so that field of infinite potential, we're not just talking about this infinite potential that exists in some kind of objective space independent of us. We're actually talking about our own true nature as being imbued with that infinite potential. And I sincerely believe that the key to being able to move through this evolutionary bottleneck that the human race is in which there are enormously powerful and misguided forces that are basically controlling how energy is generated and distributed on this planet, that is an outer reflection of a spiritual condition in the species. But I find it very, very true to notice that the universe is manifesting in the specific way that it is as a reflection of the collective state of our internal subjective world. That the fact that right now, in the midst of this planetary crisis, we're making all of these discoveries that actually show that the laws of physics, the maps of reality that we've been operating on for hundreds of years, are actually special case, limited accounts of the actual nature of reality. And that, in fact, the new physics of the quantum vacuum, the quantum plenum, reveals to us that in a very scientifically unassailable way, that scarcity, limitation, and lack, which has profoundly informed human psychology for millennia, is a lie. It cannot be sustained. This new science promises to not only provide us with guidance in building a completely clean energy infrastructure, resonant technologies that allow us to live in phase and in harmony with the universal energy field and with the earth, but it also promises to give birth to a new science, a love-based science of abundance that is expressive of and bringing into greater focus and clarity that which all the great enlightened beings have been attempting to communicate to the human race for millennia. That we ourselves have a direct access. We are directly plugged into this field of infinite intelligence, boundless luminosity, infinite potential. In other words, we ourselves, the human biocrystalline unit, our bodies, we are actually piezoelectric crystals. We are biopiezoelectric crystals. And the fact that I was able to ring a piezoelectric crystal and get an over-unity effect at a certain mode of resonance is very indicative that there's got to be in the human system a state of coherent integration and operation in which we ourselves become over-unity humans. A state in which we actually can bring about this unlimited access to the field of intelligence and energy and consciousness. That is what the new science is pointing towards. And this is really what all the enlightened beings throughout the ages have been pointing to. They've been pointing that there's a more abundant way to live. That we are limiting, crippling, and reducing our potential by operating out of fear-based belief systems, axioms of limitation and lack. And so those belief systems are actually playing an enormous role in limiting our range of possibilities. That's one of the amazing things about discovering that we are arising in a field of pure infinite potential. The only limitations on what we can do are the ones that we believe in. Our limitations really are things that we have been conditioned into, and the whole culture is conditioning us into. And I feel that one of the profound things about the new physics that accompanies the new energy technology is a deeper understanding of light. We've been operating out of a truncated and limited model of electromagnetism. Maxwell's equations are really not Maxwell's equations. They're a truncated and limited vector form of the done by Heaviside and Gibbs of Maxwell's original equations. In other words, there's whole degrees of oscillation, whole dimensions of resonance that are completely left out of the model of light that we've been operating out in the 20th century. I think that's very symbolic that the whole 20th century has been operating out of a limited and truncated view of light. As we are now starting to understand that there's more dimensions of resonance to light than we had thought, there's also more to light than meets the eye. That light is not just electromagnetic, that there are higher dimensions of light. In fact, the physics that actually explains the operation of many of these free energy devices requires us to go into higher gauge symmetries, which is basically higher dimensions of light. And these higher dimensions of light, as we come to see them, are describing higher degrees of freedom of light. Well, that's something that is described by the mystics as this discovery of the inner light. The inner light of spirit, the light of love, the light of consciousness, the light of understanding. Materialist science tends to dismiss that as just poetic metaphor, but what if there really is an actual higher dimensional field of light that the electromagnetic spectrum is just a lower dimensional parameterized standing wave pattern subset of, and that inner light may actually be something that we are made of, that it may be the very light of our consciousness, and that when we look within, we come to understand that which constitutes the field of our subjectivity is literally this higher dimensional light. The same light that these devices are engaging in certain states of tuned resonance. The fact that this new science of light is emerging at this time, I believe, can actually guide us into what I believe is the most critical area of focus for us who are interested in moving forward the new energy movement agenda, which is really, it can guide us in learning how to cooperate better. You know, humanity right now gets very low grades in terms of its ability to just cooperate. And that has a lot to do with the fact that we have been culturally conditioned and to operate out of the notion of a separate self, the notion that we are actually a separate, encapsulated, egoic entity. That's a pretty, easy way to view ourselves. It's kind of seductive to see it that way, but it just does not hold up to the tests of this new science. The fact is, we are actually all dynamic modifications of a seamless, all-pervading, contiguous field of light, energy, and consciousness, which is currently manifesting the world at this moment. And we can engage that field. We have the ability to engage the plenum. In fact, much of spiritual practice is about engaging the plenum, directly getting our body, mind, temple synchronized with this field of infinite potential, this field of loving, blissful consciousness, which is what the whole world is arising in, floating in, as it emerges moment by moment, miraculously out of this field. I think that the thing that we really need to focus on in terms of building this movement is really developing a new disposition relative to our planetary predicament, recognizing that the disposition of polarization has characterized this movement and many human movements for a long time. And the polarization manifests in this sense of like an us versus them dynamic. And I know so many inventors who are just so deeply embedded in that notion. And I can understand it. I can empathize with it because there are these absolutely tyrannical, powerful forces manifested in the form of the powers that be, the petroleum industry, the governments, etc., that are actively fighting against and preventing the innovations that we are dreaming up, that we are wanting to bring and give to humanity as a gift. And yet, that very dynamic of polarization itself is part of the problem. I believe that in discovering that there are these devices that we're bringing forth, many of them participate in this higher degrees of freedom in this sort of more open-ended space, this more creative dimension of light that we ourselves have direct access to. I believe that if we're developing a technology that is in its way of operation, several higher degrees of freedom closer to, you might say, the Great Spirit, I believe it calls for us to develop ways of operating in which we have an ethical and moral impulse in which we operate in terms of higher degrees of ethics and higher degrees of consciousness relative to what we're actually up against. We need to cohere this movement. We need to develop a way of learning how to cultivate our collective dynamic in such a way that we can become an unassailable movement, a movement that can really move forward and be a movement. I mean, a movement is meant to create movement, and a lot of movement is required at this time. And there are enormously powerful, you could call them shadow forces in the world, which really also means just unconscious forces. And these unconscious forces are not just out there in the people we may be seeking to bring along in our efforts, but they're in us. We all have unconscious parts of ourselves. And I believe that the greatest thing we can do for this movement and for the awakening of human consciousness is to really intensify our inner efforts at becoming conscious and owning and integrating and embracing all of our wounded and split off and disowned parts. Because those are the things that tend to create the most dissonance in terms of human collectives. I have seen so many different groups of people who get together around noble, high-minded ideals, and yet when you get the people together, all kinds of interpersonal stuff, human inertia, gets in the way of actually accomplishing even a fraction of, manifesting those goals. So I think that the need to realize that the sociological, psycho-spiritual dimension of this whole movement is really where we can all be empowered to be active right now. We can actually learn to transcend the tendencies that we have in our peculiar psyches, with all of their things ways we've been wounded, all the ways our buttons get pushed, and we tend to judge people and all that. We can start to discover that in waking up from the dream of scarcity, in waking up from the lie of limitation and lack, we can also start to recognize that we are not separate selves. We are actually expressions of the plenum. We are expressions of the unified field. We are absolutely contiguous with each other. We literally are each other. And in that consciousness, we actually can snap out of the illusion of the separate self and recognize that our entire outer experience is an unmitigated, immediate reflection of our consciousness, of our mind. So it's very accurate to say that at the leading edge of physics, in our understanding of the nature of the unified field as a sentient field of light and consciousness, that literally physics is discovering the universe to be a dream, to be a dream-like phenomena, in the sense that what we're doing with our consciousness affects the way events unfold in the outer world. And that if you were to wake up in a dream, you recognize that all the dream characters in the dream are not separate beings. In an ordinary night dream, you're just under the spell of the dream. You think everybody is separate beings. You think you are who you think you are, the dream ego. But you actually, after you wake up, you realize, that was all just in my mind. That was just a manifestation of my psyche. But usually that's after the fact. If you can wake up in the dream and recognize that all these apparently other people are actually expressing...
This is Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM on the internet here in Vancouver, Canada, United States, and worldwide. We're at www.coopradio.org. You've been listening to physicist Mark Cummings presenting at the Conference for New Energy Alternatives, which took place at the end of September in Portland, Oregon. And this is a special 2.5-hour co-op radio fundraising program on new energy, the courage to change. We want to remind listeners that Hidden from History with Kevin Annett, which is not on this week, will be on next week at its duly appointed hour, which is at 1 p.m. So Hidden from History will be on next week at 1 p.m. So before we go further, we're going to ask you to reach deeply into your deep pockets. We just learned that we're all connected. We're part of the infinite plenum, and we live in an abundant universe. So we want you to share your abundance. Push the abundance forward. Push the abundance forward and share your abundance with Vancouver Co-op Radio at 604-684-8494. Call in for your memberships or to renew your membership. Now, to show you that we're going to share our abundance with you, every listener, and there have been listeners calling in who have become members, who have renewed their memberships, and all listeners who either purchase a membership today or renew their memberships will get free an MP3 of this special 2.5-hour program in which you will hear presentations from the New Energy Conference by Dr. Stephen Greer, by physicist Mark Cummings, by Dr. Brian O'Leary, astronaut Brian O'Leary, by Gene Manning, the author of Angels Don't Play This Harp, and by Tom Vallone on the possibilities of new zero-point energy. So you will get a free MP3 by calling in at 604-684-8494 and supporting listener-sponsored co-op radio. And additionally, we have just one left for the next person who calls in and becomes a member or renews their membership. We have 2 free tickets, either to the Fifth Avenue Cinema to see Primer, What Happens If It Actually Works. This is a first-class film at Fifth Avenue Cinema along with a poster. Or you can get 2 free tickets to the Tinseltown Cinema for you and your guests to see Sideways from the director of Election and About Schmidt. So for the next person who calls in and pledges, they will not only get a free MP3 of this program, but they'll get 2 free tickets either to the Fifth Avenue to see Primer or to Tinseltown to see Sideways. So we're sharing our abundance with you in this infinitely abundant, scientifically proven abundant universe. You share your abundance with us, and we all sail together. Imagine a life without co-op radio. The unique sounds of co-op radio are possible only through your continued support. We want to thank those of you who are calling. We had, now there were three, now we have one line free, 604-684-8494. Please call in. The unique sounds of co-op radio are possible only through your continued support. Take out or renew your membership now. We're going to return now to the New Energy, the Courage to Change, the Conference on New Energy Alternatives, with a presentation of Dr. Brian O'Leary. And Dr. Brian O'Leary is the new energy director of the Institute for Cooperation in Space. You can find them on the internet at www.peaceinspace.com. He is an author, an astronaut. He trained in the first mission, which didn't go forward, for the first mission to Mars, which was supposed to go to Mars in the early 90s. He's a college professor, a political energy advisor, but the best title to give him is iconoclast. Excommunicated from the priesthood of science, it sounds like the canon, for his study of new energy, he is the founder of the New Energy Movement organization and was the opening speaker for their flagship conference in Portland, Oregon, September 26th and 27th. He starts with the quotes, "Society honors its live conformists and dead troublemakers." Well, let's switch that around and say, hey, we honor all our live abundanists. Take it away, Dr. Brian O'Leary.
Well, good morning, everybody. And it's so nice to be here, so nice to see you here, because we're dealing with an issue that I can't think of being more important than this particular one. And we're obviously at this juncture caught in a conundrum, because the bottom line of what we have to share with you is really pretty simple. And that is that there exist hundreds of Nikola Teslas among us right now. Some of you are right here in this room. And yet this technology, and I'm talking about advanced energy sources that include vacuum energy, zero-point energy, magnetic motors, cold fusion, low-energy nuclear reactions, advanced hydrogen technologies, and energy from the thermal environment, and possibly also some very cheap solar photovoltaics. We don't want to leave any stone unturned. We need an Apollo project to develop these energy sources. And that's the bottom line. And the cost of doing that, the research and development, is equal to about 1 day of spending in Iraq. And so we need to be educated about these possibilities. And these possibilities have been so suppressed since the time of Nikola Tesla. And many people have sacrificed their lives, these pioneers of our time. The novelist Minion McCarthy one time said that each society honors its live conformists and dead troublemakers. And I'm going to profile for you a couple of those individuals who have given their lives to this cause. We don't exactly know the cause of their deaths, but we do know that this is a dangerous profession. And that only in numbers and only with a broad-based social movement are we going to be able to prevail. We don't want any more martyrs. We want, in just sheer numbers and in the quality of our discourse, to become educated about this, to no longer make it taboo. So what I'm going to do now is to share with you a few overhead slides. And I got into this game in a couple of different ways. I'll have to describe a little bit about my own background because I've gotten into this field in stages. In 1975, I was Morris Udall's energy advisor when he ran for president on an environmental ticket. And at that time, I became aware of some of the environmental problems that we were having. And the environmental movement at that time was robust compared to what it is now. The environmental movement then that we were actually in the U.S. Congress recommending through Udall's Committee on Energy and the Environment of the U.S. House Interior Committee, we actually recommended a completely renewable energy economy by the year 2000. Something funny happened on the way to the vision. Ronald Reagan was elected President of the United States in 1980, and the environmental movement was basically killed. And nowadays, people that call themselves environmentalists, God bless them, are more focused on individual skirmishes, and we lose the whole touch with the whole global situation, which is much more serious than I ever realized. So that happened in 75. Then in 1979, when I was a professor of physics at Princeton University, I had the interesting, curious fortune of having some psychic experiences, which then kind of blew me out of academe, because of course that's politically incorrect to talk about that. And so I became a refugee from the academic environment. In fact, this is, I think, the first university venue I've spoken at in about 13 years. And then in the early 1990s, I returned to the energy question. I had taught the stuff at Hampshire College, at the School of Law at University of California at Berkeley, various courses in technology assessment, which, by the way, the U.S. Congress had an Office of Technology Assessment where people could make intelligent discourse and discussions about which technology should we choose to happen later. And in fact, as we all know, research and development forms the thin edge of a wedge of what's going to happen in future decades or centuries. And so with that experience, I began to realize that the energy conundrum that we're dealing with is only going to get worse before it gets better. And so in the 1990s, I started to look into this thing called new energy. And I was blown away, like so many of us are, when I started visiting the inventors, going to laboratories, and seeing dozens of, quote, proofs of concept. But to expect these inventors, isolated as they are, to be able to do the necessary research and development, to be able to develop things to the point that you could actually have a commercial device, would be like asking the Wright brothers to deliver a Boeing. I mean, let's face it, there's a big conundrum here, and there's a big gap between research and development. So we're going to get into that theme a little bit later, but suffice it to say is that there are many myths about so-called new energy. New energy is at the research stage of research and development. Any one concept of which could possibly save the planet from almost certain demise. So I would think that given that there's a good chance this could be developed, equivalent to one day of fighting in Iraq, that just maybe the public can come together and support the research and development that's so badly needed. And so this kind of winding, twisting road of my education produced this book, Re-Inheriting the Earth, Awakening to Sustainable Solutions and Global Truths. I'm going to go to the other side of this so I can get to my slides here. See, one of my most recent things was to learn yoga. And we're talking about the environmental movement in the 1970s was robust. And we had some really great environmentalists in those days. And I'm inviting environmentalists, whatever you want to call yourselves, to be just as bold as these people were in the 1970s. The late David Brower, founder of Friends of the Earth, said, "We are no longer inheriting the earth from our parents, we are stealing it from our children." It amazes me that there is little or no acknowledgement of some of these basic statements. Norman Cousins, the late editor of Saturday Review magazine, said, "We are committing treason, our current generation is committing treason against future generations by destroying our global environment." These quotes come from about 30 years ago, which was a generation ago. And we're committing treason this generation outrageously more than you could ever imagine. Even Al Gore, good old Al Gore, wrote a very important book in 1992 called Earth in the Balance. He said, "We must make the rescue of the environment the central organizing principle for civilization." But something happened on the way to his vision. He became vice president, and somehow there is some force on this planet that is so negative, and it's seated right in the powers of government in the United States. So we must awaken before it's too late, the coming election notwithstanding. So what are the major global challenges that we have? The ones, of course, that are getting media play is war and terrorism. And may we somehow get to the root causes of this and to reflect on what we as a nation have done to support this horrible scenario that's unfolding before us, where so many of us seem gripped in fear. We have a polluting and unsustainable infrastructure, and if you look at what's happened to the basic resources of the earth and how they are being just gobbled up in one greedy glut within a matter of years, that's going to mortgage our future maybe forever. And you start to subdivide it into major sectors, issues, depending on physical resources that demand physical solutions, not any kind of media spin or bureaucratic obfuscation. You come up basically with energy, water, agriculture, forestry. You can divide it into other areas, sectors as well. But when I looked at these issues in doing the research for my book and started looking at the State of the World series, Lester Brown, and by the way, that's an interesting aside, was that I was at Berkeley once. That's my alma mater as well as Alden's. And I returned there and gave a talk at the alumni house there. Oh, this was back about 5 years ago. And I needed to give some statistics on what the state of the world was. And I desperately needed to get a hold of a volume of State of the World. This is the World Watch Institute, Lester Brown. And they sell like 1 million copies a year. So I went running down the street, first to the University Bookshop and then to Cody's bookstore, two of the best stocked bookstores in the world, and neither one ran the volume anymore. And then I saw beer drinking fraternity people, and I was saying, is this the same campus I was on during the 60s? Now, oddly enough, in the 60s, I was an Eagle Scout almost to become an astronaut, crew cut, while the free speech movement was going on, and I somehow missed that, so maybe I became a hippie later in life. The point being, though, that things have changed at Berkeley. Things have changed on the campuses. And to have been excommunicated as I have been was a very sad experience, very mixed blessing. On the other hand, hey, you have to go for what's true for you and not necessarily go along with the herd. So these areas which I've been researching prior to the book led me to the obvious conclusion, which now more and more people are, now that it's becoming more fashionable in the media to express these problems as if they were brand new, that it's only going to be a matter of another few years, decade or two at the most, before we're going to have irrevocable problems with the planet. The other things, of course, like population, so a concern, but I believe that if we develop one or more of these sources of energy that we're going to be talking about this weekend, then we'll be well on our way to solving the other problems. They're all interrelated. And the solutions do exist, but have been suppressed by governments and industry because the profit motive, self-interest, and incrementalism are not enough to avert disaster. And we'll talk about that too, about the grieving process, to be able to muster the courage to change, which is the theme this weekend. To be able to muster that courage, we're going to have to let go of old ways of doing things, old paradigms. And that's what's scaring so many people into not even acknowledging, let alone educating about what the possibilities exist. And so we are caught in this conundrum of short-sighted thinking. This is not new to history, by the way, as I'll describe in a moment. But we now need, for human systems to be earth-oriented and visionary, we need to think of the collective interest rather than just self-interest. And to try to fit the square peg in the round holes, like how can Enron bring us into a new energy age? How can Shell Oil help us? How can General Motors help us? I'm sorry, folks. Somebody's got to take up the gauntlet here. And it can only happen through a broad-based public social movement, the New Energy Movement. The New Energy Movement is seeking to leave no stone unturned in our quest for clean, cheap, renewable, reliable, abundant, decentralized, safe energy. And I truly believe it's possible. So let us take a look at how bad things really were. And this was around the year 2000. I was kind of taking a little census of what was happening on the planet in the most general way. The population of the Earth has doubled. Actually, it's now gone up about 2.5 to 3 times since it was in the year 1950. Now, some of you out there were around in the year 1950 and might remember what it was like. I was 10 years old. I remember the pristineness of the environment, and something happened. All of a sudden, it's like waking up into a nightmare of traffic and congestion and pollution and climate change and so forth. Energy use has gone up 4 times between 1950 and the year 2000. Now it's quintupled since then. The U.S., with 4% of the world's population, consumes 1/4 of the energy's resources. Most all of it is oil. The U.S. consumes as much energy as the entire world did in 1950. The number of automobiles has now gone up 12 times since 1950. Paper use goes up 7 times. And it's interesting because Joel, who is, by the way, without Joel, this conference could not have happened. And Joel worked for Hercules Paper Company. Joel worked for Hercules Paper Company, and we've had a few lively debates about whether or not we need to cut down all the rest of the trees on the earth in order to provide paper and construction materials and so forth. Because as I speak now, with every passing second, another acre of forest on this planet is irrevocably gone. And at this rate, in another about 40 years, all the trees will be gone from the planet, or almost all the trees. But as Ronald Reagan one time said, redwoods, once you've seen one, you've seen them all. But there are substitutes for wood. For example, hemp, commercial hemp, industrial hemp, is an example of something that could be done. Yes, it may not optimize profits for the companies involved. Maybe we need some public support for alternatives to wood so that we don't have to cut down the trees. The lungs of the earth in the Amazon jungle, and we're moving to South America next week, by the way, and the Amazon jungle is being decimated at incredible rates. The lungs of the earth, the absorbers of carbon dioxide, the generator of the heat engine that drives the Gulf Stream in the earth, that's beginning to disappear and exacerbate the problems of pollution and global warming and climate change. This is all has got to stop, folks. And we have to, from our hearts and souls, start a movement to make sure we have a sustainable future in energy, in water, in agriculture, and forestry. There are many other things. Water use has gone up. Water is going to become one of the big issues, it already is, of the 21st century. So the running out of oil is like a prelude to the running out of water. And according to even the World Bank, 2/3 of the world will not have safe drinking water by the year 2020 at the rate we're going. And yet there are solutions. Some of them are pretty basic, such as preserving the quality of water and spinning the water and doing things according to the ideas of Victor Schauberger and others that have developed since then that can provide a solution to the quality and quantity of water that's available to us. But it's going to require a whole new way of thinking. And the only way that's going to happen is for those of us in this room and people just in general all over the world demanding that this happen. So we're talking about a public global movement, just like the women's movement the civil rights movement, the environmental movement. We need a new energy movement. There are many other limits that we're beginning to run up against too, such as the fish catch, many other things that are happening now. Before the concept became popular and kind of de rigueur in terms of oil use, because now we have popular books out like Heinberg's The Party's Over, and some of Michael Rupert's work, which talk about so-called peak oil. And that's a very interesting concept because now it's reaching public consciousness at last. During this decade, oil production worldwide will or already has reached a peak. And the implications of that is, you can imagine a big bell-shaped curve of oil production. Now, the peak of that curve was reached for the United States oil supply in the 1970s. And now we're going down the steep slope. But that's okay from the imperialistic U.S. point of view, because all we have to do is then go to war or capture the oil fields in the Middle East and do that for us. And that's our current government policy. And I strenuously object to that policy. We are now... Thank you. We are now at peak oil globally, plus or minus a few years. And the implications of that is that demand outstrips the capacity to produce the oil. It becomes a seller's market and the prices skyrocket. The oil companies make out just fine. I just read one statistic that was really alarming. There's a man called John Perkins who's coming out next month with a book called Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He worked for the World Bank in Ecuador, of all places. That's where we're headed. And Ecuador is now number 2 oil-producing country behind Venezuela in Latin America. And the World Bank knew this and were trying to manipulate things to happen so they would dangle money to the local government and local people in the form of a loan, never a gift, and that loan would carry such high interest there would be no way they could ever pay the loan back. And so this inevitably leads to default. In this case, it led to the probable assassination of the president of Ecuador in the early 1980s. If you look at these countries one at a time, then you begin to see this pattern emerge, which is just outrageous for us to be like sheep and just idly stand by as these things happen. And basically what's happening now is that it's become a seller's market. The resource is more than half depleted. The quality of the resource decreases. But the sad news about this Ecuador thing is that only 2 to 3% of the total amount of money that comes from producing oil there goes to the Ecuadorian people. The other 98% goes to profits for the oil companies and paying off the loan that was initially made in the first place. So this is an example of just how outrageous things have become. We should demand that things change, that we have a whole new energy policy. Now here's another, maybe more subtle point about peak oil. An exponential increase in consumption, and right now it's 4 to 5% per year worldwide, is insensitive to underestimates of the supply. So some people will say, oh, well, there's plenty of oil left in the crust of the earth. Some of the oil companies are kind of keeping secret their reserves, which they'll tap when things really get tough and more expensive. In other words, maybe there's twice the amount of oil in the earth than we thought there was. Well, any graduate or any freshman calculus student could figure out what the doubling time of a resource is, or the resource depletion is, as a function of how much there is left in the crust of the earth. And it turns out that we could extend the supply of oil in the earth, if there were twice as much oil, by another 15, 16 years. You know, give me a break. Here we are in one greedy glut, wringing this lifeblood out of the crust of the earth within a matter of a century, between the years 2050 and 2150. We can't keep going on this way. I can't believe what's actually unfolded on this planet versus the idealism that I brought to it during the 1970s, when I thought the environmental movement would take over enough, at least, to educate government officials and and places like the Department of Energy to do the necessary research and development to lead to a clean and sustainable energy economy. And just the opposite happened. SUVs, an administration made of oil people, and this incredible imperialism that's unfolding that's just blowing my mind. We are hitting the wall in the supply of oil. At current rates of consumption, most of the oil will be gone by 2050. And by the way, it's not only oil. I'm listing some other things too. We are near peak production worldwide, not only in oil, but in water, wood, topsoil, natural gas. The fisheries, we're already on the downhill slope of that one. So you can begin to get the picture. We're now at the peak of grandiose consumption of the most basic resources in the earth. Now, in the new energy movement, our main focus will be on the energy question. But we're going to be looking at some of these other questions too, to try to understand and model our future so that we can have a truly sustainable future. Regardless, we must radically change our policies. We need to get beyond the obfuscation and the confusion and the spin that accompanies these things. I hear rhetoric, wonderful rhetoric, coming now once again from Al Gore, now that he's out of political office, and other people talking about that we need a renewable energy economy. We need to replace oil. We need to replace nuclear power because of some of the dangers of nukes. Now, there's a lot of debate about that. The conventional wisdom is that the oil companies would be happiest and the Bush administration would be happiest if we simply went to nuclear power to produce electricity and then burned biofuels and hydrogen for our transportation systems and home heating and cooling as we run out of oil and natural gas. This would then give them an infrastructure that will give them profits. But can we ever approach this from the point of view of what's best? What kind of energy sources do we want? That's the question we need to be asking, not what is Shell Oil Company going to do for us? We've been subservient, sheep, when it comes to all of these questions. And meanwhile, we see unfolding the fact that we are now in the biggest mass extinction that we've been in for 65 million years. When the dinosaurs became extinct, we are becoming dinosaurs. And in sucking up this organically decayed dinosaur material made literally of dinosaurs that have now become hydrocarbons in the crust of the earth, it is now time to awaken to a human management of this planet that makes sense. If we don't do that, then we're all cooked. So how can we yield to the greed of the few in order to be on this Titanic that's sinking, clearly sinking? How can we be able to emerge and get power back to the people rather than in the hands that it's now in? Toxic pollution of the atmosphere, mostly due to the routine burning of fossil fuels in our power plants and transportation systems, has already killed hundreds of millions of people worldwide, just through air pollution and water pollution. We have more carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere than there's been for 160,000 years, just because of the routine burning of fossil fuels. Disaster relief budgets worldwide have gone up 10 times. The heat waves in Europe last summer, the hurricane season this year, the El Nino phenomena are robust indicators that there is very little question that human activity, mostly the routine burning of fossil fuels, is what's creating these disasters. Disaster relief budgets up tenfold in the last 20 years. And we have the depletion or scarcity in the world's basic natural resources. Well, as Einstein one time said, no problem can be solved from the same consciousness that created it. So we need a new consciousness. We need to arise in our consciousness, become at least aware and educated as to what the possibilities are. And there are many, and these are just some of the solutions. We obviously are going to need to shift our energy sources from to emissionless new and renewable ones. We need to preserve, restore, and sustain our forests, grasslands, crops, waterways, and oceans. A lot of the work that Alden Bryant has done, his activism in the Earth Regeneration Society and Howard Jeter, that's the kind of work we need to have done. To have an activism, to go to the UN and convince them to have a climate treaty. We need to regenerate the biosphere of the Earth. These are the kinds of goals we need to be discussing, and why this is not happening at universities, I can't begin to fathom. Money, yeah. That's it. But we got to cut through that one. We need to develop new agricultural options such as hemp, straw, organic farming, permaculture as substitutes for chemicals and biotechnology. We need to look at the role of water for health and convert the materials economy to a 100% recycled one. In the U.S., we're 10% of the way there. We got to go the other 90%. We're going to focus on the rest of this talk this morning. And if somebody can also make me aware of the time, I am not sure how much more time. Oh, 10 minutes. Got a while. Okay, great. So the energy solutions. What are the energy solutions? And that's what we're going to focus on in my talk this morning. We certainly can improve the efficiency of our energy systems. Amory Lovins has said that without sacrificing any lifestyle change, we could improve the efficiency of energy systems by a factor of 2 with just very minor changes like in power plant systems and in gas mileage for cars. Unfortunately, Amory kind of stops there, although he does talk about traditional renewable energy. One time I ran into him. We've been colleagues for like 30 years. I've known him for 30 years. So one time I ran into him at one of the airports and asked him, what do you think of new energy? And he went like this and walked away. And you see, this is part of the problem, is that most scientists and environmentalists and experts are not even aware of what the possibilities are, and they gruffly resist the change. We'll get into that a little bit later. We have the conventional renewables, and I like conventional renewables, believe me, solar, wind, and so forth. But part of the problem there is, and some people have tackled this question, is that it's very materials intensive. Let's say, imagine a world with nothing but windmills and solar collectors, photovoltaic collectors. What would the cost be? What would the implications be for mining the materials required to make these collectors and manufacture them? And when you start to look at that number, it becomes staggering. We're talking about trillions upon trillions of dollars. But still, it's one heck of a lot better than oil, and in my opinion, nuclear energy as well. And we can discuss or debate that issue as well. But the conventional renewables, as much as I have really wanted them to work through the years, it just doesn't quite add up in meeting current energy demand worldwide. Now, that doesn't mean to say we can't cut back, that we can't be more efficient, that we couldn't nevertheless work with that and adjust to it. I think we could. So I'm not necessarily a 100% advocate of new energy. What I am is somebody that wants to open up discussion and debate about these issues and to become educated as to what these issues are, because they're so important. Now we have the hydrogen economy. That's another interesting thing. Some of you probably know that in California we have a new governor, Governor Arnold. And Arnold says, we will have gas stations in California every 20 miles. We will have hydrogen economy for my Humvees. And yeah, that's a possibility. You could retrofit the 1 billion or so cars we have on the planet and create new ones with so-called hydrogen fuel cells or hydrogen combustion. But there's so many.
This is Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO, 102.7 FM. We welcome those listening on the internet here in Canada, in the United States, and throughout the world at www.coopradio.org. You are listening to a special Co-op Radio program, New Energy, The Courage to Change. This is the Monday Brown Bagger. I'm Alfred Weber. You have been listening to astronaut Dr. Brian O'Leary speaking at the Conference on New Energy Alternatives in Portland, Oregon. So here we are. And Co-op Radio, located in Vancouver, is actually world-renowned. We have earned international respect for our success. We have often been used as a model for the development of other community-based radio stations. And across the world, there are people trying to keep non-commercial, non-profit radio alive and growing. And this is especially true in the case of the growing monopolization of the airwaves. You may have been reading about the case in the United States where one commercial network was able to air a documentary about one of the candidates and to force all of their affiliates to air that, which was not news, which was really political advocacy. Well, here at Co-op Radio, because we're listener-sponsored, we're only beholden to factual, truthful recording and reporting of alternatives, of political truth, of political dimensions, and political voices, and scientific voices, and cultural voices, and gender voices that do not get access to the airwaves. So we're asking you to be part of Vancouver Co-op Radio, to play a role in keeping the worldwide network of community radio strong. You remember that old saying, it comes out of, I think, the 60s, which is think globally and act locally. Well, you can act locally by becoming a member or renewing your membership here in Co-op Radio. It's very easy. And not only that, if you call right now, 604-684-8494, everyone who calls who renews their membership will get a free MP3, of this special 2.5-hour program on the New Energy Conference, at which you've heard the voices of, and will hear the voices of, Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, physicist Mark Cummings, Dr. Brian O'Leary, Gene Manning, the author of Angels Do Not Play This Harp, and Ton Balone on the possibilities of zero-point energy. So we're asking you to call to keep a worldwide network of community radio strong through acting locally and becoming a member of Co-op Radio or renewing your membership, 604-684-8494, and you'll get a free MP3 of this entire program. We're now going to listen to the presentation of Gene Manning, author of The Coming Energy Revolution and Energy, as well as Angels Do Not Play This Harp, who said that her goal was to make the new energy field user-friendly for the general public. So Gene Manning, who for many years lived here in the Lower Mainland.
Is Gene Manning. Gene is an investigative journalist who for years has been alongside of people like Brian, talking and visiting and reporting on new energy inventors and their technologies. And Gene has a very unique capability in being able to break down these complex technical topics into digestible information that the mainstream public can assimilate. And that's why we wanted Gene to be a strong part of our early program here, so some of these technologies and inventors can be presented to everyone. So I introduce Gene Manning.
Are my mics working? Oh, I guess they are. Yeah. Love that music. That can kind of set the theme for a whole movement, I think. The I Choose Love. It reminds me of a conference I was at years ago in Ottawa when prestigious science conference, and Dr. Marcel Vogel was speaking. He was a scientist with IBM many years, string of academic credits, and someone from the audience asked him, Dr. Vogel, what is the most powerful force? And Marcel Vogel said, the most powerful force in the universe is L-O-V-E. Love. I think that the work of Dr. Masaru Emoto really backs that up too. His thousands of photographs of water crystals showing that the most powerful force is some sort of a subtle energy affecting the way water crystallizes is love and gratitude. So I'm really grateful to be here, and I'm your tour guide this morning. Metaphorically speaking, we'll be flying over a huge territory because the landscape that's dotted with new energy research and development is quite vast. In fact, one inventor alone said that he feels like he's found a whole continent full of discoveries. And I find it's a really exciting time because of the beauty of this new science. I'm just a reporter. My degree is in sociology, so I don't pretend to have the technical stuff down pat. We've got engineers and physicists on the program that you can ask the technical questions. I've been looking for the big picture of where this all fits in. I'm a grandmother now. I was young when I started this, but it's for the sake of the children that we do this. My first slide is a little whimsical music of the spheres. One of the inventors said to me that he thinks that in the near future we'll be tuning into the harmonic vibrations between the stars and planets for the source of our powers. And maybe it will be a little bit more mundane than that, but whatever we do, I have faith in the human spirit. And I've used the metaphor of a map to kind of give a framework to talking about where the new energy fits into the clean energy continent. It's incomplete, uncharted territory right now. And I put a mountain range in the form of a great divide down the middle of this clean energy scene because there is, in a way, the explorers, they have to climb up to a height where they can get a bigger perspective and look off into the distance and maybe toward the sea of energy that can be tapped. And also there's a hump that you have to go through if we're highly educated academically. It's a little harder to get to the point where you're looking at the non-conventional energy technologies because, I mean, I've got my skeptical brother-in-law and friends that kind of, yeah, I read the science magazines and you're a little bit deluded to think that this stuff is real. And if we want to be hip and fashionably skeptic, it's a little bit more of an emotional hump to go over to have the courage to look at the new energy technologies. We're going to figure out how to do this first. Or we'll go on past this because genemanning.com isn't up yet. When I get the new addition to my, go back, Coming Energy Revolution this fall, then the website will be up. But starting down to earth, so to speak, and then we can take the conventional renewals and combine them with something innovative, like in the case of Essential Innovations geothermal, combining it with artificial intelligence. And also geothermal can be combined with the Tesla discs, which William Baumgartner, who was going to be here as a speaker, is an expert in. And by the way, I'm going to, because he can't be here, I'm going to devote a considerable part of this to the Victor Schauberger approach that William Baumgartner is such an expert in. I visited him a few days ago and have included some of the slides from that visit. This is Jeff Hayes, the author of a book, Tesla's Engine, I think is the latest one, holding up one of the discs from boundary layer turbine. And Martin Berger is going to be talking about an innovative way to just kind of basically plunk an upside down egg beater windmill down into a riptide is kind of the basic of it. We'll be glad when he's got the small run-of-the-river ones going. And also still in the renewables section, you can combine the breakthrough magnetic motors, generators, with wind and tidal and have something revolutionary. I hope that Mark Cummings will be talking a bit about tidal power at some time this weekend. And then there's also revolutionary approaches to solar. This gentleman down in the lower, your right hand, Alvin Marks, has an approach to solar that's more like what plants do in photosynthesis. He's an expert in polarizing light and nanotechnology, and there are students from, I think it's the University of Maine, that go down there every weekend and help him out, volunteer. So this is what the new energy movement needs, is the young blood, the volunteers that are helping these gentlemen. Alvin had funding from even the CIA at one point. They were interested in his solid panels more so than the flexible solar panels because they wanted them for their spy satellites. And then they got their information and went on and left him unfunded. They got what they wanted. And there are all sorts of paths right now. There's a company, I think it's Kanarka Technologies, that has innovative nanotechnology approach to solar. Printable films are coming. Solar will become a lot less expensive in the near future. This gentleman, Owen Barker, he's more the new paradigm, stacking solar cells with magnets together. And if anybody knows where he is, I'd like to know what happened to that invention. I had the privilege of naming the Sun Mill. The hydrogen scene. I was at a conference about 2 years ago, a major hydrogen fuel cell conference. A lot of good people putting their energy into this field. But I was really, really saddened. I'd heard ahead of time that my hero, Jeffrey Ballard of Ballard Fuel Cells, had decided that we have no choice except to build thousands of nuclear power plants to get the electricity to electrolyze water into hydrogen. But just to hear him in person giving this speech to 1,000 engineers, and they're all accepting this as a reality, I couldn't handle it because it's so unnecessary. If they would just open their eyes to the new alternatives. And that's what I call the Trojan horse, or I call it the hydronuke economy. And also another thing about hydrogen is I'll be mentioning a scientist by the name of Professor Ruggero Santilli, who has a long string of academic honors and credentials and everything, really impressive scientist. And he has on his website that combustion of hydrogen takes 5 times more oxygen out of the atmosphere than combustion of gasoline. Check it out. If that's true, we've got to really look at this seriously. I like Roy McAllister's approach with the American Hydrogen Association, a bunch of volunteers they're teaching people how to do it yourself, that approach to using hydrogen in small is beautiful. Now, blacklight power has been covered. So Brian O'Leary very ably talked about Randall Mills, so I won't really spend much time on that. Actually, I have to run through these slides really quick because we're short of time. And here we're getting into the new stuff. Hydrogen on demand. What a concept. You're driving your vehicle down the road. You don't have to have a tank, explosive, potential bomb full of hydrogen, although those tanks are engineered now so they're not all that dangerous. But you don't have to have hydrogen pipelines, all that expensive infrastructure, because this is the approach that many of the new energy researchers are working on, is generating it at point of use. We'll meet a few of them. One of them is Professor Konarev in Russia. Again, a very, very well-credentialed scientist, does really serious science. And his process is 10 times cheaper in terms of the electrical input than standard electrolysis. And I think it's if you Google for Konarev, K-N-A-R-E-V, or Innoplaza is the website where his papers are up. And it explains more about his process. A note from our sponsor. So there's all these other different approaches. The carbohydrogens, I think, arc technology, the Jim Griggs. I expect that Ken Rowan might be mentioning that in his talk tomorrow. And, well, this is Professor Santilli. Magnagas.com is the website where you can read his papers and see his long string of credentials and check out that information about hydrogen, burning of hydrogen, taking out 5 times as much oxygen out of the atmosphere as combustion of gasoline. But his Magnagas is a revolutionary approach, and there's something about this process that does create a gas that has been tested, quite thoroughly tested, to actually put out more hydrogen through the tailpipe than it took for the combustion. Pretty incredible, but check it out. This is Jim Griggs again with the you can't really see the details on that rotor in the top picture, but there are indentations that create a turbulence in the water. Basically, what he started with is he was an engineer who was a specialty in energy efficiency and got to thinking about water hammer, the knocking in the pipes. That there's a lot of energy happening during that knocking of our pipes that we hate in the middle of the night. And so he created this rotor within a cylinder that creates turbulence in the water, and it seems that there's some sort of a cavitation or inward imploding bubbles taking place in there that generates heat, and so you have basically a furnace that doesn't require any fire underneath it to heat the water, so it's a lot safer. See the blue flame coming out of or it's not flame, but the blue steam coming out is quite an unusual feature of it. Again, Ken Rowan can tell us more of the technical details of that if he has time to. It was interesting about how long it takes for the establishment to get on the bandwagon, and very reluctantly too. Science magazine took some flack for even printing these articles about bubble fusion. This is some more inputting sound or frequencies and having these bubbles implode so fast that the tremendous release of energy. And Infinite Energy magazine, which Dr. Malev published and is still published, the magazine's still publishing, they were 9 years ahead of this of the established magazines, because I remember in 1995 on their cover, Dr. Roger Stringham's picture and his sonocavitation process was a featured article. And now we're getting into the territory. One of the names for the process that was unfortunately given the name cold fusion is light element fusion, because the elements involved are a lot lighter. I really like that a lot better. Cold fusion has been thoroughly given a bad rap. In fact, somebody said that the most successful thing about the whole cold fusion field was the misinformation campaign against it. And here we have one of the students of John Dash and Dr. John Dash over in the corner picture, and we will be hearing from him tomorrow. Brian O'Leary covered the cold fusion story very well, and I won't have to go into that. But one thing I want to say, that people like me, the tree huggers, the greenies, the very terminology that these scientists use, and I understand from their standpoint, they're talking about the nucleus of an atom, so of course you talk about nuclear this and nuclear that, and you're talking about atoms, so you talk about atomic this and atomic that. But boy, it doesn't go over well with the public. Just the very symbol, I don't know if you can see the little atom symbol up in the corner, that was shown on a TV screen when, at the same time that Dr. Stanley Pons was interviewed, and the association in the public mind is totally all confused. And we get the impression that it's just yet another variation of hot fusion, which the hot fusion process does totally mess up the materials of the equipment that's used. It ends up all radioactive. Some of the cold fusion experiments do have some smaller amounts of radioactive elements associated with them. And so it's certainly not the favorite of the environmental community because of all the misunderstanding about it. And it's funny, there's one of the myths about new energy, it seems, is it came up a few days ago when a really nice man who works for a utility company, introduced me to a group, and he was mentioning coming to this conference, and he kind of passed it off as, but nothing is going to come of it because these new things are so expensive. And I thought, where have you been? Are you thinking about mega projects, solar satellites microbeaming down to the planet? Excuse me, but that's not my favorite. Or a space elevator, or what are you thinking about? Or are you thinking about hot fusion when you think that the new energy technologies are expensive? The whole point of the new energy technologies is small is beautiful and cheap. And some of the experimenters are making things out of roller skate wheels and bicycle wheels and tin foil. And the whole point is to come up with something empowering that somebody can make in their backyard. Here we have the late Paul Brown and Ken Shoulders, who thankfully is very much with us. A couple of the science pioneers who showed that it is possible to transmute elements in the experiments they do. If you excuse me just a moment, I want to find my notes on this. So just take a deep breath. You're probably tired of running through slides so quickly. Okay. I was going to follow my notes all along, but Rowan, just wanted to get this straight because Ken Shoulders does really important work. He developed much of the technology for microcircuitry, and he continues to make breakthroughs. And he found a way to make these charged clusters that contain an incredible number of electrons, and they're bunched together in a way that conventional textbooks say is impossible, but it's happening. And it may be the basis of the energy gain in so-called cold fusion. And he now calls these things exotic vacuum objects, or EVOs. And I'm really pleased to hear that what he's preparing to work toward now is toward direct electrical output generating systems using these EVOs to carry forward his previous work. And he's decided that he doesn't want to spend any more time on the systems that generate heat, such as the cold fusion experiments do. And his reason for turning away from those types of experiments is that they are self-destructive. Their metals get used and abused, put it in my words. So bear with us if you're not interested in technical details, but I just wanted to get this in, that he wants to use electrical trapping methods to contain a swarm of random EVOs. And this forced containment will prevent the EVOs from coming in contact with solid material and destroying it. So basically, it'll make the EVOs much easier to work with. And when these exotic vacuum objects are released from this electrical trap, they'll be in a form that resembles ball lightning, but not ball lightning in the wild, but instead ball lightning that can be harnessed to do work. So these are amazing little charge clusters that propel themselves, and the propulsion energy is many times more than the electrical energies that's put into the experiment. The source of all that extra power, it isn't proven, but it's theorized to come from zero-point energies that are provided whenever the motion of charges are resisted. And there's a physicist, Dr. Jacques Sarfati, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. He's furthered the theory, and so Shoulders just has to find a way to couple the amazing motion of these EVOs into what he says easily available circuitry. And then we'll have the electrical output that we need. This is Ed Wall and Ken Rowan in the red at the New Energy Research Laboratory back east. They've experimented with many approaches and tested and innovated a whole variety of new energy devices. I put the website for the magazine there at infiniteenergy.com. Ken will be speaking tomorrow, and he has a lot to tell us, so I won't pretend to translate it into my words, but one of the Infinite Energy covers said that simple tabletop experiment turns conventional heat theory upside down. The heat engine can tap into the heat of the environment in a way that really has been overlooked. So maybe it just seems to violate the law of thermodynamics, but on the other hand, maybe the law just it's time to reinterpret it, just like it was reinterpreted before nuclear fission. Know-it-all scientist says that's impossible, that violates the law of thermodynamics. So they had to reinterpret the law afterwards. And he says that the science to do this is known science and doesn't involve high-tech materials and doesn't involve high-tech processes. So that's good news for our small is beautiful and simple approach. A lot of the experimenters and scientists that I hear and read about in this field are mentioning resonance, so it's worth mentioning when we're trying to look for some common themes in and musically we understand resonance. Say you strike the A note on a piano and a nearby violin tuned the A string might vibrate. But everything in nature affects everything else. That's part of the understanding that's underneath the emerging science, because we're just made up of subatomic particles that are in perpetual motion. And the speed of the motion and type of motion affects its vibratory rate of frequency. Everything has its resonant frequency. Music and sound.
This is Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM, and listening online on the internet in Canada, the United States, and around the world, www.coopradio.org. You've been listening to author Gene Manning, author of Angels Do Not Play This Harp, and I'd like to read from just a paper called The Launching of the New Energy Movement by Stephen Kaplan. He says, quote, Manning acknowledged the suppression of these new forms of energy, yet she rallied the crowd and gave them hope in her final slide. 2 simple light switches, one turned off and one turned on. Quote, let's turn off the power of corruption and turn on the power of the people, she pleaded. Manning proclaimed that en masse, people, unafraid of new technology, can start using small is beautiful technologies and thereby save the world. Her overview of the field made it possible to believe that people really can do just that. We're almost at the end of a special co-op radio program on new energy, the courage to change, listening to selected presenters from the Conference on New Energy Alternatives held in Portland, Oregon. And this is that very special time of the year when we ask you, our listeners, who are the owners of Vancouver Co-op Radio, because we are community owned, to call in and support us. And today, to share our abundance with you, when you call in to 604-684-8494 and become a member or renew your membership, you'll get a free MP3 of this special program on new energy. Now, we're a non-commercial station. We don't air commercials. Programmers do not buy their airtime. We don't rely on big corporations or government for money. We remain truly independent, grassroots, truly collective, and non-corporate. Our largest single source of funding is our listeners. We're listener-sponsored, non-commercial radio. And your membership is critical to keeping British Columbia's only independent, community-owned and operated radio station on air. And that's us, Co-op Radio, CFRO 102.7 FM, www.coopradio.org. So call now, pick up the phone, acknowledge your ownership, share in the abundance. Remember, what you give comes back 1,000-fold. Call 604-684-8494 and support us so that we can bring to you this programming for another 30 years. We'd like to remind you of a couple of websites. The website of the New Energy Movement, which put on the conference on new energy alternatives, if you'd like to pursue this further, is www.newenergymovement, all one word, .org. That's www.newenergymovement.org. And Don Norden, our fellow Brown Bagger producer and on-air host, called in with a notice of a conference taking place on the peak oil. And the website for that conference is www.communitysolutions.org. That's www.communitysolutions.org. You've been listening to a special co-op radio fundraising program. Many of you have called in to buy new memberships, to become members, and to renew your memberships. And we certainly want to thank you, those of you who have called in and become members and renewed your memberships. We have listened to important alternative voices, those of Dr. Stephen Greer of the Disclosure Project, Mark Cummings, the physicist, astronaut Dr. Brian O'Leary, Gene Manning, and others such as Tom Malone, whom we did not have time for today, but we will be covering in future broadcasts. And some listeners called in asking if the full presentations of the speakers will be played, and the answer is yes. We'll be playing the full presentation of the speakers at the Conference on New Energy Alternatives in coming Monday Brown Bagger programs. And if you would like to be notified and become part of the Monday Brown Bagger email list, to be notified of Monday Brown Bagger program, please send a blank email with this in the subject line Monday Brown Bagger, and send it to the following email address: info at all one word peaceinspace.com, info@peaceinspace.com, and you will receive periodic updates on coming Monday Brown Bagger programs. We're now at the end of our 2.5 hours. We want to thank all of our listeners for the support that you have given and will continue to give to us, for your interest in this important area. Together, we will bring the earth through this time into a time of new promise. My name is Alfred Weber, on behalf of Don Norden and myself and John Pranger and Bea Bernhausen, who so graciously took your phone calls today, and the Monday Brown Bagger Collective. We wish you a wonderful